Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, publisher of The Devil's Punchline, the only Hangman's Joke fanzine.
Oh, nice. I'm glad that you came up with a title for your fictional fanzine about this fictional band.
You got to go all in if you're going to go for it, Josh.
You do indeed. So in this special retrospective season, our 10th season of Awesome Movie Year, we are taking a look back at all of the years that we have covered in previous seasons and picking out one new movie to cover from each one. And in this episode, we are going all the way back to the first year that we ever covered, which was 1994. And back in, well, not in 1994, but back in 2019 or 18 or whatever, time is a construct, man. When we started this fucking podcast, we did not have an episode in that season with a pick from our wonderful producer, David Rosen. So we decided for 1994 in this season, we would go with Dave's pick. So Dave,
before we get to Dave's pick,
yes.
Josh, we should really open it up. Why didn't we let Dave have a pick in 1994?
I mean, I think it wasn't that we didn't let him have a pick. We just didn't think of it as something to do. And then after that season, Dave said, hey, I'd like to have a pick. And we let him out of his cage and told him
it was weird.
Pick a movie.
You kept fighting against it. No, I know he's going to pick the 10 and stuff like that. And I was like, we got to give him a chance, though.
It was no malicious intent on our part.
To be fair, I wasn't even watching all the movies yet.
That's
at that
true.
Point, so
I was just going to say that Dave was much less of a participant there in the early days. So, but now he is really a beloved part of our podcast, and really the podcast would fail entirely without Dave's contribution.
I mean, and with him, it fails partially. So,
yeah. So just see how things are going. But Dave, tell us about your pick for 1994.
Oh boy, my pick for 1994 is the goth classic, The Crow.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, as Jason was alluding to with the 10, many, if not all of Dave's picks have been kind of goofy comedies. That seems like Dave's go-to thing, but that is not what we've got here at all. So what did The Crow mean to you, Dave?
So I hadn't seen it in at least 20 years up until this week, and I didn't really remember that much about the actual movie itself that much. To me, it was mostly the soundtrack, the rock, alternative rock, industrial goth soundtrack, which was a major inspiration to me as I started getting into making music myself. As some listeners of the show may know, definitely you guys know, I compose music for films. I put out albums of instrumental music, and I was very inspired by this soundtrack, by The Cure, of course, is like my biggest influence. 9 Inch Nails, My Life with the Thrill Kill Cult, who actually appear in the film. A lot of this kind of music on this soundtrack was just so instrumental in like making my tastes in music kind of come alive. And this film obviously came out in 94. I was 13 going on 14. It was the perfect time to get into this kind of music. And although I never went full goth, I never wore the all black and did any of the makeup or any of that kind of stuff. This kind of music was what carried me through high school.
I have two quick follow-ups, Dave. One, did the music, I mean, it must have enhanced your enjoyment of this film when you first saw it, correct?
I would say so, yeah. It was the music, but I would say I fully enjoyed this film on the level when it first came out back then as a 13, 14-year-old dude.
And my second question is, had you wanted to go full goth, would your parents have let you?
Probably. I did for one of our Polar Bear MC's concerts, and there's some really ridiculous pictures with my mom with her arm around me and me in full makeup and everything. And so yeah, she would have loved it if I had.
Did you dress as the Crow or just in kind of a generic?
It was just an all-in goth kind of persona. It was pretty Crow-like though.
All right, awesome.
I'll send you guys the picture.
Yeah.
I think we should post those on our social media, perhaps. So Dave was not alone, of course, in being heavily influenced by this film, both musically and aesthetically. It was certainly a big movie for kind of the mall goth subculture, maybe we can call it.
Sure.
But of course, the biggest thing about this movie, the biggest story about the movie, and the thing even now that I feel like most people remember about this movie is the tragedy of Brandon Lee, the star of this film, who plays Eric Draven, aka The Crow, who was killed in an on-set accident with 3 days left to shoot. So the movie at that time was briefly shut down. There were discussions of whether they should continue at all. Ultimately, although it was dropped by its initial distributor, Paramount, in part because of that incident, was picked up by Miramax, which added an additional $8 million to its budget. There were some rewrites and reshoots, and they went ahead with the film without Brandon Lee's last scenes that he was meant to shoot, via rewriting, some digital replacements. Stuntman Chad Stahelski, actually, who has, of course, gone on to be a big filmmaker, was the stuntman who replaced Brandon Lee there. And so when this movie came out, it was really known for that. It was known as the movie where Brandon Lee was killed.
It still is. It's impossible to watch it and not have that. I mean, it's his movie, right? You know, he carries every bit of it. He's in, I think, if not every frame, just about every frame, right? And so it's just, you can't. I was, reading quotes from like Alex Proyas, the director, and he said, this is his legacy, this is his movie. So it makes it harder to watch, obviously, but I think probably back then, like, people were getting swept up in it. At the same time, this is, still happening, as we know from the set of Rust, right, where the director of photography was killed. And a few years ago, there was like was she a PA or a camera person who was killed on that movie in Atlanta when a train hit her? So just stuff that should not be happening at this point and shouldn't have happened then. If you read about how this happened, just really, really bad protocols and or not even following protocols and chain of command, just stuff that could have been prevented all the way through.
Right. And sadly, if you read about what happened on the set of The Crow, it's remarkably similar to what happened on the set of Rust. And sad that all those years later, the same protocols were not being followed properly or not being implemented properly. But I think it's weird. I don't remember as much what the kind of discourse was around this film at the time with relation to on-set safety, but it feels very different from what we talk about right now with Rust, which I'm sure will never be finished, versus this, where everyone, it seems like I watched the Siskel and Ebert episode where they talk about this, and they don't really express anything about concern for safety protocols. Just, hey, there was an accident and it was tragic. And everybody focused on this as sort of a tribute to Brandon Lee, which is, it is and can be, but it sort of surprises me that there wasn't more of an outcry about this being in poor taste, or just that more should have been done, rather than just like, the show goes on, let's finish the movie, more money in the budget.
Yeah.
But that is what happened.
Yeah, different time, obviously, not as much of the 24-hour news cycle, or now the constant news cycle, right? So all that plays a part of it, and I think we're more sensitive as people, but no doubt, like, just such a preventable situation should have never taken place.
Absolutely. But for certainly, at least partially because of that, people were very curious, and people also did end up really liking this movie. It was not necessarily tipped to become a big film even before it was made. It was almost a direct-to-video film, and then, switched distributors. But ultimately, it was a huge box office hit. It grossed $94 million on its budget of $23 million. It was also nominated for 3 MTV Movie Awards, which seems like exactly the kind of awards that a movie like this should get. It was nominated for Best Movie and Best Actor for Brandon Lee did not win those awards, but it did win a Best Song award, which of course appropriate for the success of the soundtrack for the song Big Empty by Stone Temple Pilots. And the soundtrack was a huge hit, maybe even arguably a bigger hit than the movie. It did hit number 1 on the Billboard charts for 1 week and spent a total of 44 weeks on the chart. And I definitely still have the CD in my house, which I imagine Dave does too.
Sure.
Sold 3.8 million copies. Brandon Lee also won the 1995 Fangoria Chainsaw Award for Best Actor.
All right. Yeah. So, I mean, not a movie that obviously was going to go to the Oscars or anything like that, but for the demographic that it was aimed at, it was a huge success. And critics were mixed to positive on it, I would say. Like I said, I watched Siskel and Ebert talking about it, and they were split. Ebert liked this movie a lot. He gave it a thumbs up. He really liked not only Brandon Lee's performance, but also the overall atmosphere and visual style. Siskel, however, gave it a thumbs down and did not feel like the style was enough to make up for the narrative shortcomings. In his written review, Roger Ebert said, "The Crow is, of course, the movie Brandon Lee was making when he was accidentally shot dead during the filming of a scene. It is not without irony that the story involves a hero who returns from the dead, just as, in a sense, Lee has with the release of this film. It is a stunning work of visual style, the best version of a comic book universe I've seen, and Brandon Lee clearly demonstrates in it that he might have become an action star had he lived." And that seems to be kind of the big theme even now about this film, is that Brandon Lee could have been launched into this huge career if he had not been killed on the set of this film.
Yeah, I think that's pretty clear through this movie. And also the production design is the other star of the movie, right? So the music, the production design, Brandon Lee, those are the 3 stars of the movie. The other thing that I found interesting in Ebert's review was he said it's Lee, speaking of Brandon Lee, Lee's best film and better than any Bruce Lee movies.
Yeah, I don't know if he means better in terms of the acting or just as a movie. I mean, and I can see that because Bruce Lee, having watched a small number of Bruce Lee movies, as amazing as he is in terms of his martial arts abilities, he never really was in like a great movie. And he also died before he had the chance to really do something like that, where if he had become, he was just becoming a big star and would have been able to go beyond kind of the B movie exploitation stuff that he had worked in and be in a bigger budget film, could have been in something great, but never was. I haven't seen enough Bruce Lee movies to say that that's true necessarily, but I don't know. Have you watched Bruce Lee movies?
No,
Jason?
But I do love The Last Dragon.
Okay.
Sure enough.
Thank you for that. Nor had I seen, I think Brandon Lee did some small things before this, but this was really a
the 2 biggest, I think, were Showdown in Little Tokyo, which had Dolph Lundgren, and Rapid Fire, which produced a few sequels. At that time, you can make movies like this and get those sequels out, right?
It still happens with these low-level films. So Karen James in the New York Times was slightly less enthusiastic overall. She said, "It is a dark, lurid revenge fantasy and not the breakthrough star-making movie some people have claimed. But it is a genre film of a high order, stylish and smooth. Its dark look of midnight terror and its skewed cityscape link it to the Batman movies. But The Crow makes even the bleak Batman Returns seem like a kiddie's playground. The film does offer promise for the future of its director, Alex Proyas, a 33-year-old Australian who is a veteran of music videos and commercials. Mr. Proyas's flair suggests he might make the leap to mainstream success. Sleek and accidentally haunting though it is, The Crow belongs in its niche." And I kind of agree that this movie has been, maybe because of some of those extraneous aspects, elevated beyond just a dumb B movie. I mean, as I was watching it, I was like, that's all that this really is. It almost surprises me that this would have been a theatrical release, because it really feels like the kind of thing that would have gone straight to video. Like, here's kind of a dumb action revenge story with a bit of cool visuals to it.
Well, I think the soundtrack helped, right? That helped mainstream it, and obviously the story around it. Also, I think if it was just going to go to video, especially in the 90s, there would have been a lot more boobs, Josh, because there were a lot of boobs in those direct-to-video movies in the 90s. So.
There are definitely a lot of boobs in the later Crow movies, I think, or at least in the ones that I saw. So maybe because they went straight to video, that was what happened. So finally, Owen Gleiberman in Entertainment Weekly was the least enthused. He said, "Were it not for Brandon Lee's death on the set of The Crow, he was killed by a gun that was supposed to be firing blanks. The movie itself would be little more than your basic heavy metal occult revenge thriller, complete with rain-swept futuristic dreamscapes right out of Blade Runner and Batman. The truth, though, is that what happened to Lee, who was Bruce Lee's son, lends this blood-spattered action fantasy a creepy resonance it otherwise wouldn't have had. Lee's performance is by far the best thing about The Crow. Unfortunately, he's just good enough to make you wish that the movie had had a whisper of storytelling invention to go along with its showy visual design." And certainly the story here is not.
I mean, look, they were backed into a corner, obviously, with all the rewrites and how to make it complete. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to defend it, but I mean, I can see where the difficulties were. I found the critic James Berardinelli, Josh. He had a kind of a chilling phrase to describe it, was art imitating death.
Yeah. I mean, they're not necessarily wrong. Obviously, inadvertently, the themes of this movie go along with the sort of tragic death of an artist that was taken down before he was able to reach his potential. Of course, Hangman's Joke, as Jason's fanzine will document, never got the rock stardom that they potentially could have. But yeah, certainly there is a lot here, maybe more so than other movies where some kind of tragedy has befallen the film during its making, and it's had to, make up for that. And we watch the movie being aware that this actor died, whether it was in an accident on set or in some other way. There are certainly other movies where they end up completing them. But in terms of the story, yeah, they had to do some rewrites and reshoots, but the bulk of it was the same. I mean, Brandon Lee had shot the bulk of his part before he left. Before he died. So, I mean, I don't think you can entirely blame the storytelling deficiencies on the fact that they had to shoot around his absence. And I mean, definitely watching it this time, it struck me like this is a very poorly written movie.
I had never seen it before this time. So I think, I tried to get swept up with the visuals, which I think it did do. And then, I agree with you, because this was one where I started it and, it was late. So I had to, I couldn't watch it all in one sitting because daddy needs to sleep. And so I watched the first half hour and I'm like, oh, this is super fun. And then I came back and I was like, nope, not fun anymore. So, because I mean, could the whole thing could have been told in 12 minutes, right?
Right. Yes. It's very, very basic, and there's not much suspense to it. There's not much surprise to where, Eric Draven comes back from the dead. He says, I'm going to kill all the people who were responsible for killing me and my fiance. And then
one by one.
One by one, very straightforward style. We should say, of course, that this is also, as Ebert alluded to, it is based on a comic book by James O'Barr, also called The Crow, which was kind of an underground thing. It wasn't a Marvel or DC comic. It wasn't a massive hit. Really, the movie helped The Crow comic book become a lot more well-known than it was. But that source material and the basics of the story, as well as the characters, do all come from the comic by James O'Barr, which I have not read. But and I was a comics reader at the time, but it wasn't something that was on my radar as I was reading like the X-Men and Superman and stuff like that. It was too underground for me.
So Josh, did you see this in the theater?
I probably did. I definitely saw it at the time. and liked it at the time. But like Dave, I was more into the soundtrack, like a lot more into the soundtrack. Although weirdly, this is another one of these things that was my recollection. Like, oh, I was super into this soundtrack and I have the CD. And then I was watching the movie and hearing so many songs. I was like, I don't remember this song. And of course, the thing really for me was that I bought the soundtrack because it had like 4 songs on it that I wanted to hear. And then as a teenager, I took those 4 songs from the CD, recorded them onto a compilation cassette along with some songs from other soundtracks, and never listened to the rest of the soundtrack. So like Stone Temple Pilots, Pantera, 9 Inch Nails, For Love Not Lisa, who had one song that was on here. Like all the hard rock stuff I was into and listened to a lot. Rage Against the Machine is also on here. But Dave, I was like, unlike you, I never liked the sort of gothy stuff. I don't like The Cure. And so I really had never listened to that probably since I bought the CD. Like watching this, especially the theme song, the Jane Siberry song.
That is a horrible song. That's the worst song
track on the album. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a horrible song. And listening to that, as the movie ended, I was like, this is a horrible song. And I don't think I've heard it in, 25 plus years or whatever. So, but yeah, I definitely was into the whole aesthetic of it as well. I, like Dave, did not dress, in goth makeup or anything like that, but certainly was into that whole vibe. Dave and I were the goths at the time. Jason was the guy who was beating.
You were my friend in high school. What are you talking about? Josh, you and Dave were both so pale. I don't think you needed the makeup. I wouldn't have beaten you up. I would have made fun of you, but I made fun of everyone. So I'd like to think I was equal opportunity on that. Hey, Josh, did this music influence your high school band Anime in any way?
Anime, yeah, probably so. Thank you for bringing up Anime, my awesome band that I was the lead singer of, much like Eric Draven. Certainly we were influenced by Rage Against the Machine and Pantera and 9 Inch Nails and bands like Stone Temple Pilots, bands like that. I don't think we covered any of them, but we covered Danzig and Tool, who definitely...
Violent Femmes.
We did cover Violent Femmes, yeah, who are also on here, but we did like a hard rock version, and I'm pretty sure at that time that was literally the only Violent Femmes song any of us had ever heard in the band, and we just picked it. But yes, certainly... If not specifically the Crow soundtrack, like the sound of those bands, the hard rock of the 90s was 100% our biggest influence.
And Dave, you were not in a band in high school.
No, I wasn't. No, I had no musical talent yet.
It's so weird.
I had no musical talent either, but it didn't stop me.
Fair.
Where can we find Anime online, Josh?
Nowhere, ever. Definitely not anywhere online. No Anime anywhere. You can find Anime on a cassette in my closet, and that's where it should stay.
I remember when the band formed, they had one member of the band, I think was it your bassist, who had never played before, but he's like, I want to be in the band. And they're like, okay, get a bass and you're in. And then he got a bass, and then he was your bassist until you fired him for not being good enough for your band.
Well, okay, 2 things. One, there's actually quite a
long history of that in music.
History of that, exactly, of people who went on to become very successful.
That's garage rock in the 60s. I wasn't knocking it. I was just telling the story.
Yeah.
So.
But no, it was not the bassist. It was our second guitar player who did that. And yeah, he sucked. He bought a guitar, but he actually, I want to say he didn't even... He like borrowed a guitar from the other guitar player for too long. He was really not dedicated. I think he just wanted to say that he was in a band, and he wouldn't, I feel like he missed some practices, and yeah, he definitely did not follow through on his commitment to learning to become a guitar player. And I think when we kicked him out, we, of course, we're teenagers, it's high school. We felt like it was very dramatic. We all the rest of us all got together and confronted him like, you are no longer in the band. And he was like, okay. It was really very anticlimactic.
So you didn't throw him out of a window where he fell to his death below, and
No, he didn't return from the grave to wreak revenge on us. Nothing like that. He just was still our friend.
Yeah.
As far as I can recall. And the band was much better without him in it.
Yeah, it got better. I admit it. So,
I mean, not that it was good, but it was at least more competent without the guy who did not actually know how to play the guitar.
This has been a great episode of Anime, the podcast history of Josh's band.
You brought it up, man. You brought it up. Getting back to The Crow, do you have any other thoughts on the background of this film, Jay?
Well, no. The only thing I want to say is I like, did you call it Devil's Night? Did you celebrate Devil's Night growing up or anything?
No, I think because the movie is set in Detroit.
That's a very Detroit thing.
Right. If I recall, it was a thing that was really unique to Detroit. And maybe now people talk about it more. But the idea of it being this night for mayhem and crime, I feel like there were news reports about how that happened in Detroit, but not necessarily elsewhere.
That was Devil's Night. Now, Dave, we grew up in similar places. We had Cabbage Night, which was the night before Halloween. And we wouldn't set fires or anything, but that was the night where you could go around and like toilet paper people's houses or throw eggs at their cars, do dumb stuff, and just like childish vandalism.
I don't remember the name Cabbage Night though, but definitely the night.
That sounds fake. Did you make that up?
No.
Why was it called that?
I don't know. I'm going to throw cabbage at you though.
Thank you. See, this is Jason's instinct to beat up the Goths.
Yep.
I would have protected you if someone tried to beat you up back then or today. You know that.
Thank you, Jason. Luckily, no one was beating me up in high school. It was middle school where they were bullying me. Everyone was mostly nice to me in high school. Anyway, let's not talk.
Dave had a question about it. I could tell
about me being bullied.
No. I was gonna say it would be a good name for one of the direct-to-video sequels. The Crow Cabbage Night would be.
Yes, that would be perfect. We'll come back then in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on The Crow. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our special retrospective season, we are looking back to our 1994 first season for Dave's pick, The Crow. Oh, that's going to hurt someone's ears.
That was my impression of a crow.
Thank you for that. So Dave, you talked a little bit about it, but what did you love about this movie, especially when you first saw it?
I guess there's a lot of like that teen, dark, angsty stuff going on here in what maybe I liked about it because, as a 41-year-old adult, it just, I don't know, it did not work as well this time around. But I feel like I guess back then, all things dark, gothy, comic booky, even in the, in video games, I was like that too, with things like Mortal Kombat and all that kind of stuff. Like anything like that was just dark and drenched in black and all that, like, was cool back then. And Jason mentioned the production design earlier as being a character. I do still think that holds up, as well as some of the music, maybe not all of it. But yeah, there's a lot here that just doesn't work.
The only thing is, Dave, I don't understand what angstiness did you relate to of the man who was murdered and came back to avenge all the murders? They avenged the murders by killing them. Like, it wasn't a love story where like the guy couldn't build up the courage to tell the girl that how he felt about her or anything like that.
I have no idea.
I mean, I will say that I think with teen angst, like, not that Dave or anyone who was a fan of this film was, murdered and had to come back to avenge their death, but just the angst, the like general sense of angst. And, as a teenager, you feel these big emotions and they feel like the most important thing in the world. And you relate it to like, oh yeah, my angst about talking to a girl at school or, someone doesn't like me or whatever dumb stuff. It feels like it's like you've been murdered and you have to avenge your death. And so, movies like this, they're sort of like a representation, not a literal representation, but a metaphorical representation of the big dark emotions that you might feel. So, I mean, I'm with Dave in that I certainly was drawn to kind of dark, moody stuff as a teenager. Although I liked this movie, but this wasn't one of those movies where I feel like, I revisited it over and over and over again. It was the music more than the movie itself. But I feel like that
was it sense. Like the Craft for you? Was that your movie, Josh?
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes. The Craft was my movie. I saw The Craft multiple times. I have The Craft VHS tape here still.
Fantastic.
And I watched this is also not relevant, but I did watch The Craft not that long ago because the terrible like sequel reboot thing came out. And the Craft, it held up better than The Crow, but not as well as I hoped it would, unfortunately. But yeah, The Craft was 100% my jam.
Just to add to what you were just saying, though, about not exactly knowing how much you loved it back then, but you definitely liked it more. I also, while I was watching this, I was trying to think like, did I actually revisit this film many times? I certainly own it on DVD, but how many times did I watch it over the years? Maybe not many. Like, I just remember when I was 14, I was like, oh, that was so cool, but that's pretty much all I remember.
Yeah, I feel like the coolness of it was a big thing, and like the logo and just look of it rather than necessarily, but I'm sure there were people then and now who will watch this movie over and over and over again, because it is that kind of movie that if it really emotionally resonates for you, you would watch it over and over again.
I mean, again, I think sadly all of that is tied into Brandon Lee, and he is the charismatic lead, who is this the greatest performance on film? No, but did it show potential to be a leading man? Yes. And the thing is, it's tough to separate the movie from the story on this one. This is one of those where like when we talked about Boondock Saints, which I think is pretty much almost the same movie, I get wrapped up in all the behind the scenes stuff, and that helps me enjoy it. I think people might have been emotionally tied to this because of all the stuff that happened sadly with this film.
Oh, absolutely. And sadly, given that it's a real person that died, but the truth is that the whole teen angst aspect of it feeds into that as well. Like, oh, this tragic person who died, just like Kurt Cobain or any, artist who dies tragically at a young age. Young people who have these big emotions will gravitate toward that. So that's absolutely true. But again, one thing that struck me watching the movie this time is that Brandon Lee is not good in this movie.
He's not bad.
Performance.
He's not bad.
I thought he was really bad. But I will say, and not to speak bad of the dead, but I will say part of that is the character. I think the character is so cringeworthy, and I can't imagine who could make any of that really work very well.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it is a ridiculous comic book character. I mean, the character who is the Crow is named Eric D. Raven. And I mean, thank you for that. So, it's the kind of thing, maybe it works in the comic and I haven't read the comic, but it is a ridiculous character. I feel like, though, there are so many ridiculous comic book characters where we can look at them in good comic book movies and say, someone like Heath Ledger as the Joker or something like that, where that character is absurd. And you would think maybe no one can really make that a good performance, a good character, but a really good actor can do that. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe Brandon Lee just wasn't experienced enough, and maybe this would have led to a great career that you can see a bit of promise. But the one thing that I was figuring going into this is the Brandon Lee movie. Like, I'm going to be impressed again and sad that he never got a chance to do anything else. And it's bad. It is a bad performance.
So you're not sad that he was murdered on the set, Josh? Is that what you're saying?
Not at all. Not at all. Nothing of value was lost. Obviously, of course, it's sad. And I can see that there is a bit of promise that if this movie had come out and he had lived, I think, first of all, this movie would not have been as big a hit. It might have been, a minor cult thing, and it would have given him a chance to be in a better movie
and not
dead also. And maybe have a lengthy career after that. But no, he's bad. But more than that, almost every single actor in this movie is bad. I thought Ernie Hudson was the only one who showed up with the level of experience and professionalism to deliver the garbage writing in this movie.
Yeah, remember when we talked about Ghostbusters and you were talking about, how Ernie Hudson maybe got the short end of the stick. And I was like, he's been in like too many things to count. He's a he's a bring your lunch pail to work and do the job type guy. And this is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Ernie Hudson, who plays the cop who investigates the death of Eric Draven and his fiance, and then becomes sort of the, I don't know, sidekick or whatever to resurrected Eric Draven the Crow, helps him track down all of the bad guys from this ridiculous gang. I mean, can we talk about the villains in this movie and how they might as well have been from like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Saturday morning cartoon?
I mean, is that any worse? Or like, I don't want to say worse, but I'm not defending this, but like, what's the difference between this and the Joker, like you mentioned from Batman 89 and all that stuff, you know?
Well, right. I mean, I think like I was just saying, part of the difference is the acting, is that Jack Nicholson can make that work. And none of the actors here are Jack Nicholson. You know, Michael Wincott, who plays the main villain, Top Dollar, I think is his name.
Horrible name.
All the villains have horrible names, which you know, to be fair to the screenwriters here, all come from the comic book. Yeah, he's Michael Wincott is no Jack Nicholson. And Alex Proyas, as much as the production design looks cool, is no Tim Burton. And part of that too is, you know, a director working with actors to modulate those performances and make them work. And this movie, unlike Batman 89, which certainly has a tone of campiness, especially in Jack Nicholson's performance as the Joker, this movie takes itself incredibly seriously because it's all about dark angst. And so when you get these absurd villains with their dumb names and their horribly written dialogue, it's not played for laughs, really, but it becomes more laughable because of that.
I think Proyas, was this his first feature, right? This was it.
It was his second feature. I
don't think he was ready necessarily for all that came with this one, right? You know, visually he's great, but maybe he wasn't mature enough to handle all of that, you know, and get the actors to where they needed to be. Because, yeah, the bad guys are just, you know, like you said, it's Bebop and Rocksteady in black trench coats or something like that.
Yes.
But I will say I liked, you know, they all get killed in different ways. I did like the one kill where I think it was T-Bird, where he ties him to the car. Like he kills him in 3 different ways at once. He ties, he ties him to his car, puts the gas pedal down so the car is going to drive into like a river, right? And so he's going to drown, but he also makes the car explode, and it's just like a lot of murder on T-Bird.
There's definitely, I think, multiple moments where things explode in this movie, like that would not have exploded, and it just is like the force of will of Eric Draven that makes stuff explode. Yeah, I feel like those kinds of moments that are so over the top, or when we see him, you know, the one guy who does the knife throwing and he's like, I never miss. And then he just misses like multiple times immediately. and he's eventually dead with like 8 knives in his chest. And ditto the other guy who gets killed with all Tintin. And then the other one who gets killed with all the needles in his chest.
Fun boy.
And it looks so thank you for all of these excellent names. I mean, it looks silly when you see those corpses. And I feel like if this movie maybe had been campy, it could have been fun. And I realize that's not the tone of the comic. And the comic is inspired by like James O'Barr's own like serious personal, you know, heavy feelings, depression and all of that. And maybe they're trying to honor that along with honoring Brandon Lee. But I don't feel like any of the seriousness in this movie works.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, you know, like we said, Alex McDowell's production design is a highlight here. Graham Revel did the music, and, you know, Brandon Lee did his thing. And I mean, I think we got it, right?
Yeah. Do you want to mention Sarah, the little kid who's also his friend, Rochelle Davis, the actor?
Wasn't that just a Batman ripoff where like they take her up to the top of the tower and, you know,
That was, yeah, the climax where she's in peril. But, you know, she's sort of an effort to give Eric Draven a human connection.
Well, and I think a lot of that had to be part of the rewrites, right? Because it's her narration.
Yes, yeah, that's true. And that is one thing where maybe the rewrites do hurt, because it opens with that narration from her, which is just horribly overwritten. And I think like right from the start, I was like, uh-oh. And that's something that they had to add in with the rewrite. So Yeah, so Jason, I guess we're tapped out on this one.
I mean, I know we don't want to keep going in circles. You've already killed the Crow yet again. So,
I mean, I didn't hate it. I just think that I remembered it more positively and was slightly surprised and baffled as to how not very
That's
good
how
it
I
is.
felt.
It's interesting because I've never seen it, so I was able to be like, well, there was a reason I never saw it, but I'll just enjoy the set design and stuff like that. So yeah, we can rate this thing out of 5 morphine needles if you want. So
that's a highly appropriate thing to use. So let's do it. What do you
give it? I give it 2.5. I like the look, and there was the music is cool, and Brandon Lee, I do think would have gone on to become a big star. It gets 2.5 morphine needles, Josh, all injected into you.
Thank you. I'm gonna also inject it with 2.5 morphine needles because I didn't hate it. Like I said, it's more about just the disappointment of, oh, actually, this isn't very good. But I think there is some promise there, and it's possible that Brandon Lee could have gone on to great things, but this would not have been one of those things. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
I'm actually also going 2.5, the same as you guys. Yeah, it's just surprising how not good it is, but it was fun to watch, though. It's not all bad.
Yeah.
So I guess what we really learned is we should have stuck with our original plan in season 1 and not given Dave picks.
I had I had so many 94 movies I could have picked from, but yeah, what are you going to do?
I mean, I probably enjoyed this, and especially revisiting my, childhood experience more than some of the other movies that Dave has picked. So I'm okay with it.
Name like 2 or 3 others you were going to pick, Dave.
I was thinking about Speed, Natural Born Killers, and The Professional. Those were my 3 top other ones.
Yeah, those would have been good, Josh. I would have taken any of those.
Yeah, but I mean, plenty of interesting. It's not like we haven't had anything to talk about here that's notable and interesting. So I'm good with it.
It's all good.
Let's come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of The Crow. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our special retrospective season, we are returning to 1994 to talk about Dave's pick, The Crow, starring Brandon
Josh,
Lee.
I got to interrupt you because I got a surprise for you, Josh. I got a surprise.
Oh, are you returning from the dead to avenge your murder?
Nope, but I've been working on this the whole show, and it's official. In the next edition of The Devil's Punchline, there will be a half-page cutout of Anime.
Oh,
advertising you and your music.
That is so kind of you. Because the truth is that if you are a fan of Hangman's Joke, then you probably will enjoy the music of Anime.
I mean, that's what the caption's going to say on your picture.
Thank you. I've got a promo photo of Anime that I can send you to use.
It's going in the zine, baby.
I appreciate that. So, as we've talked about, the biggest story around this movie at the time and still is the death of Brandon Lee. And I feel like, just like rock stars who die young, like Kurt Cobain or Amy Winehouse or Jimi Hendrix, the tragedy of Brandon Lee's death has led to this sort of idolization of him.
Well, you got to separate those. Those were, if not suicides, self-inflicted, shall we say, right?
Right. Well, but you could go with the members of Lynyrd Skynyrd who died in a plane crash, or other people who died young at the height or at the beginning of their popularity.
Sure, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's obviously resonant to pop culture to this day, right? There's that South Park episode where Satan has the Christmas party, I think, right? And he says no one can dress as the Crow because everyone always dresses as the Crow, and everything like that.
True.
So people still dress as the Crow, Josh.
They do, and the Crow beyond just Brandon Lee, the Crow as a character has continued in popularity, as we've alluded to a little here. There were multiple sequels to this film, which were not successful, but starting with The Crow, City of Angels in 1996. The Crow Salvation in 2000, and The Crow Wicked Prayer in 2005, all of which feature different actors, of course, and different characters. Instead of following up on Eric Draven each one of those movies features a new character who dies and comes back to avenge their death. The Crow City of Angels, I actually did watch, is very, very bad. That one was poised to really take this franchise, given the success of the original, they thought we're going to make this into a whole big franchise. And it was a massive failure, featuring Vincent Perez as the new version of The Crow, as well as an adult version of the kid, Sarah, from this film. So that's the connection, is that she's grown up and she's now, of course, sexy and played by Mia Kirshner. And she kind of falls in love with the new Crow, but she also functions as like his guide because she has experienced this in the past. And it's very bad, although it does feature Iggy Pop as one of the bad guys. And he gets to say, "Fuck you, bird dick," to the Crow. So that was really...
That sounds amazing.
That was probably the best part of the movie. But Dave, did you own the soundtrack to The Crow City of Angels? Because I certainly do.
I do not. And I know that it leaned a little more metal, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah, it did. And looking at those CDs recently, I realized I liked that soundtrack a lot better. There were far more as like White Zombie and the Deftones and Bush. And definitely Hole is on it. They had a big hit with their song from it. So that was definitely Filter. Their song was a big hit from that one too. Yeah. So that was more my speed, I think. But the movie is bad. And Dave, I think, did you watch one of the later sequels recently?
Actually, just this morning, I had never seen any of the sequels, but this morning I watched The Crow Wicked Prayer on a recommendation from my friend Ryan, who said that it is just absolutely hilarious. And he was right. This is one of the best bad movies I've watched in a long time.
That's exciting.
I was just dying laughing. It stars Edward Furlong as the Crow. Also, David Boreanaz and Tara Reid and Dennis Hopper. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And it takes place in Lake Havasu, which I just thought was hilarious.
Where is
like Lake Havasu, but it sounds kind of evil,
ravaging.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay.
What platform was this on, Dave?
I rented it on Amazon Prime for $2.99.
Cool. And then, the one before that, Salvation, Kirsten Dunst was in, and that you said is from 2000, and she was already like a hot star at that point. I'm surprised she was in that one.
Right. Well, that one, I think, almost went to theaters, but because the previous one had failed, they pulled it. So, perhaps it was set to be a bigger project than it was when she first signed on to it. There was also a Crow TV series in 1998 called The Crow Stairway to Heaven that aired on the Sci-Fi Channel. And weirdly, despite what they did in the movies, where clearly they were trying to be respectful of Brandon Lee, in the TV series, the character is Eric Draven, played by Mark Dacascos. And not only that, but as it looked just from the listing, of course, I've not actually watched it, but all of the supporting characters, Shelley and Sarah, and all of the same villains are all in that TV series that lasted for one season. So I'm not sure how they kept that story going for 22 episodes, but they did.
Well, Rob Zombie was going to do The Crow 2037, and it's almost fun to read about all these like potential reboots of The Crow, because it's like, oh, Bradley Cooper's attached. Nope, now he's gone. Mark Wahlberg's attached. Nope, now he's gone. Channing Tatum's attached. Nope, now he's gone. Ryan Gosling's attached. Nope, now he's gone. James McAvoy's attached. Nope, now he's gone. And literally, I haven't even read half the names I've written down. The last one was Jason Momoa. It's just like, maybe we can let The Crow not live anymore. So
yeah, I mean, they've been trying so hard since 2005, when the last movie was released, to come up with a new version of this. And I'm sure they will, because we're in the era where literally anything that anyone has heard of will be rebooted. Alex Proyas specifically, Jason, I think you read part of that quote earlier, has been kind of opposed to the idea of rebooting The Crow because he wants it to be Brandon Lee's legacy, but it's already been tarnished by all the crappy sequels anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Dave, when you guys were talking about the soundtrack, did you know that New Order was approached to like do the soundtrack originally? That would have been a soundtrack I would have wanted, Josh. But I got to say, we are dancing around the real thing here, which is the biggest influence of this film was when Sting changed his character from the beach blonde surfer dude in WCW as the franchise to the Crow character to fight the NWO. And that was the hottest wrestling angle for over a year and helped WCW beat Monday Night Raw for like 83 weeks in a row, Josh. Why haven't we talked about that yet?
You're absolutely right. That's a big thing. That I forgot all about that. Yeah.
I was not a wrestling fan, really, certainly not by that point, but it's perfect that Jason has never seen The Crow, but is very familiar with the pro wrestling version of it.
Sting, Josh, is now 62. He's in AEW, and his character is more aligned with The Crow now than it with like that beach surfer dude from back in the day. He's kind of like a Crow Joker mix, but he's still going. So Sting's the man, bro.
Good for him. And yeah, the look of The Crow is so influential on tons of things. I feel like every version of the Joker that came after this, whether it's Heath Ledger or Jared Leto or Joaquin Phoenix, all are influenced by The Crow. And maybe The Crow, of course, itself was influenced by the Joker, but I feel like, and even further Batman movies or other comic book movies, like the look of this and the darkness of it. This came out at a time when there weren't that many comic book movies other than those Batman movies coming out, but the embrace of the dark storytelling from comic books and taking seriously stupid villains with dumb names, I feel like is part of the legacy of this film.
So, Josh, I'll give you a few more things. Darius Wolski, who's the director of photography, does a lot with Ridley Scott, including Last Duel and House of Gucci from the past year. Alex McDowell, who we've shouted out for production design, did Fight Club, which we've obviously covered, and The Terminal and Fear and Loathing. And now he's got like some type of crazy, I don't even know if I understood it. It was like some type of sim institute where it's about problem solving by building like model worlds or something like that. It was above my level. Look, I could tell you all about Sting, but this one is a bit over my head. So
right. No, that's fair. Alex Proyas, as we said, this was his second film, and it was a big breakout for him briefly. He went on immediately after this to make Dark City, which is also a hugely influential and a huge cult following. Roger Ebert was a massive champion of that film. And then he did go on to work in Hollywood, not exactly a stellar Hollywood career, but he directed I, Robot with Will Smith, the film Knowing with Nicolas Cage, which is another one that weirdly has a critical cult following, including Roger Ebert, who thought it was brilliant. And most recently, Gods of Egypt, which is terrible. All those movies, I think, are not good. And he's not prolific. He has tons of things that he's always working on and trying to get going that never really get off the ground, including sequels to Dark City and stuff. So I feel like he didn't really live up to the potential that he showed in this film.
Well, I'm going to disagree only because I listened to an interview with him on Indie Film Hustle from the last year. He's back in Australia. He's creating his own studio. He's basically said like he can't work within the parameters of the studio system, but he wants to make bigger budget stuff like this. So he's figuring out his own way to do it in his own place, right? In his home country. And he's also got this new platform called Vidiverse, which is supposed to, be a revenue generator for short films. And you'll be happy to know 2 of my short films were rejected from Vidiverse.
Oh, nice.
I don't know what you guys are laughing at. You collaborated on those films. So.
Oh, okay. So we all lose here. But no, I mean, good for him that he's doing that stuff. And I feel like maybe then finally, if he is able to independently make a genre film like The Crow or like Dark City, he'll be able to follow up on that initial promise. I just don't think that he has. At this point.
But I think like now is the time where people are like, hey, we want to make movies outside of the studio system that are studio-esque, and let's figure out ways to do it,
Yeah, I'm all for that. I'm all in favor of that. The soundtrack, of course, was also very influential. I feel like the 90s were this heyday of soundtrack albums being massively successful on like the Billboard charts, and especially the particular kind of soundtrack that this is, where it's basically just a compilation album of a certain genre or a certain approach or whatever. And, we got to the point later on in the 90s, I think, where a lot of these soundtracks were almost tangential to the movie. Like there were just a compilation album that happened to have the movie's name on it. And there were a lot of these albums that were like songs from and inspired by this movie where it didn't really have anything to do with it. I think of like the Judgment Night soundtrack.
Movies inspired by the soundtrack that we got the rights to. So.
It could be. But I feel like the success of this was a major catalyst for that. This and maybe a couple others like Singles, the Cameron Crowe movie from a couple years ago.
Well, that whole movie is about that time in that place.
Well, right. But I feel like the idea of the soundtrack being its sort of own, having its own existence and being a compilation album of a particular style or a particular aesthetic. Obviously, Cameron Crowe was much more invested and involved in curating a soundtrack like that. But I just think of myself as a teenager. And what did I do? I bought those soundtracks. I never saw Singles as a teenager, but I bought the soundtrack. The Crow, City of Angels, I saw yesterday, but never before that. But I've owned the soundtrack for 20 plus years. So I feel like there was a lot of that.
There were 3 in a row right here. This, Natural Born Killers, which also had 9 Inch Nails and was produced actually, the whole soundtrack by Trent Reznor. And then Lost Highway was also. And so these all were part of like a thing of that late 90s era.
Right. And I think a lot of that, of people getting the soundtrack and being into the music and not really caring or paying attention to the movie.
Yeah.
I did want to do one more shout out to some of the character actors in this movie that we didn't mention who've gone on to, prolific character actor careers. Tony Todd, aka the Candyman, is in this as one of the henchmen of the bad guy. John Polito, great in Coen Brothers films, who plays the pawn shop owner in exactly the same mode that he plays probably like literally every character that he's ever played.
We could work together and exchange information.
Exactly. And Bai Ling, who plays the half sister of Top Dollar,
half sister full lover.
Exactly. Who he's having a really unnecessary plot element, incestuous relationship with. She is insane and very prolific in really bad B movies where she just shows up and goes nuts for like 2 scenes. And you're like, what is happening? Clearly, no one wrote lines for her.
If I may, also in a film I scored called Better Criminal. And I got to meet her at the premiere. She was very nice. Also stars Tom Sizemore.
Oh, nice. Is she weird in person as she is in movies?
Yes, weird, but nice. Yeah,
I'm surprised, Dave, you didn't mention T-Bird because he wasn't John Wick. But of course,
sure.
I like, our Walter Hill connection. Forget, Streets of Fire. We talked about the Warriors. He's the guy in Warriors who said, Warriors, come out and play.
I mean, if you've done that, then what else do you even need in your career?
True.
Something that Dave scores, maybe?
That's when Bai Ling knew that she had made it, was when she was in a movie scored by Dave Rosen.
Yes.
So that is The Crow, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. Check us out on the social media.
Yeah, we're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. My website, goforjason.com, needs a crow to come and resurrect it. I'm Jason Harris Comedy or Jay Harris Comedy on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
My website, only barely clinging to life, joshbellhateseverything.com. Also at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook and at Signal Bleed on Twitter. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod. And I might as well plug my very dark, very gloomy, very angsty instrumental music. You can check it out on all of the music services, David Rosen, and on my website, bydavidrosen.com.
And like the Crow himself, once you listen, you'll hope someone throws you out a window.
Oh, man, that's unnecessary.
Thanks, Jason.
Whatever. He scores my movies. I obviously like his music.
I know.
Of course.
What is coming up in our next episode, Jason?
It's time for our cult classic, and we're going to 1999. Jim Jarmusch, a very cool movie, one I like. It's called Ghost Dog, Way of the Samurai.
So tune in next time for Ghost Dog, Way of the Samurai, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
an All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.